In this video, I'll show you exactly how I created this logo animation. If you're wondering why I made a logo that says logo, it's because it was an example to demonstrate how the principles of animation can be used to create professional looking logo animations for my class Bring a Logo to Life. Principles of Animation for Motion Designers. Let's take a look at the project files for the finished version and then I'll recreate it step by step. This is the main composition where I have 3 different versions of the same logo animation. So if I go into this is where all of the animation happens. And then if I go back into the main comp, these 2 additional comps are for the accent layers. So I'll show you how to do that at the end. Let's start by recreating this animation. So I'm going to create a new composition. I'm making this 1500 by 1500 pixels, 30 frames per second, and 5 seconds long. The next step is to just use text layers to recreate the logo. So I'm going to do each letter on its own layer of text. You can see all my settings for my font here, but feel free to use your own. And then I'm just going to be lazy and duplicate this, and then change the letter. And then I'll repeat that for the other letters. It might be helpful to zoom in and turn on the grid to make sure that you have everything lined up nicely. Because I'm going to animate the letters changing shape, like kind of creating these smears, what I need to do is convert these into shape layers. To do that, right click on one of the text layers, go to Create, and then Create Shapes from Text. For some reason, it doesn't let you do them all at once. If you select multiple, the option is grayed out. I'm going to delete the original text layers. The way I'm going to tackle this animation is to animate the position and scale properties of each letter, and then at the end I'll go back and animate the path property. So let's start with the L. And the first thing that I want to do is move the anchor point so that when it scales from the top. And it's also going to be animated in from the top, so I think having it scale from the top will look better than having it scale from where the anchor point currently is. To move the anchor point, you can use the pan behind tool, and then if you hold Command, it'll snap into place. Next, I'm going to open up the position property and go to like 25 frames and set a keyframe. And then let's go back to 10 frames and have this move over to the left. And then at the start of the timeline, let's have it move up. So just kind of animating in reverse. So something like that. I'm also going to add a little bit of follow through. So instead of just having it come to a stop right here, it's going to overshoot its final position and then come back to it. So to do that, I'm going to move to 1 second, copy and paste this keyframe, so this is the final position, and then I'll move back to this keyframe at 25 frames and just move the L over a little bit to the right. So now it looks like this. So it overshoots a little bit and then comes back to its final position. That's a principle of animation called follow through, and I talk more about that and the other principles of animation in my class. These are all linear keyframes, which makes the animation look really boring and mechanical. So what I'm going to do is select them and do F9 to easy ease. You can also right click, go to keyframe assistant, and then easy ease. And then I'm going to open up the graph editor with those keyframes still selected to adjust this graph to make it look even better. So right now it looks a little bit better, but I can make this look even more snappy. So first I'm going to click on one of the keyframes to bring up the handles, and then let's just drag this holding shift to make sure that I don't go like that and adjust the keyframe. I'm going to drag this so that it's going faster at the beginning. So I'm looking at the speed graph. This is showing a graph of speed over time. So it's going to start off pretty fast. The peak of the speed is right here, and then it's going to slow down as it reaches this first keyframe. And then let's exaggerate this motion, so it's going to be slower, and then faster, and then slower. And then also for this little anticipation peak, I'll do the same. So let's see what that looks like. Much better. You can finesse this as much as you want, but let's just keep going. Next, I'm going to animate the scale property. So with this L layer selected, I'm going to hit Shift S to bring up the scale property. I'm going to go to 10 frames and set the scale value to be 100%, and at the start of the timeline, I'll set the scale to be 0. So now it's going to scale up as it's moving down, and then it'll move over. Let's add follow through to this animation too. So I'm going to move this keyframe over to like 15 frames for it to be at 100%, and then I'll set the scale value to be a little bit bigger than 100%. Let's do 105 here, so that's going to scale up a little bit too big and then shrink back down. Let's add easy ease to these keyframes. And then go into the graph editor and just make these a little bit more dramatic. So I'll kind of try to match the position graph so that the peak speed is right here. And let's see what that looks like. Now I just need to do similar position and scale animations on all of the other letters. If you go into the final version, you can see that the top O is going just straight down and the G is going straight up. And then the last O is going up and then left. Also, notice that I've positioned each of the anchor points so that it's on either the top if the letter is on the top or the bottom if the letter is on the bottom. I'm going to speed this part up since it's pretty repetitive. You can adjust the easing on sets of keyframes across layers by selecting them all at once, adding easy ease, and then going into the graph editor, and then just clicking and dragging to select the keyframe, and then you can grab both of those handles at once. I have the position animations for the O, G, and O, and I already adjusted the graph editor for the O and the G, but for this last O, it has the same kind of motion as the L, so I want to copy this exact easing onto these keyframes. There's a handy tool that's free or pay what you want called Ease Copy, where you can easily do that. So if you select the keyframes, then you hit copy, then you select the keyframes that you want to paste those easing values onto. I don't want to actually paste the keyframes because then the O would be over here where the L is. I just want to paste those easing values. So I'm just going to hit ease over in Ease Copy, and now it will have the same easing. For the scale property, you can actually copy and paste the exact keyframes onto each of the other letters. Here's what it looks like so far. Now let's animate the path property of each letter to give it that smear effect. This is another principle of animation. But before we do that, let me explain why I keep talking about the principles of animation. If you've ever felt like your animations weren't quite stacking up to the level you were hoping, there's a good chance that the missing secret sauce is the principles of animation. These principles are essential for creating engaging, lifelike animations and can be applied to all different types of animation projects. As a self-taught motion designer, I neglected fully understanding and implementing these principles for far too long, and I don't want you to make the same mistake. In my class, Bring a Logo to Life, Principles of Animation for Motion Designers, you'll learn how to use the principle of staging to establish rhythm, how to add anticipation to capture the viewer's attention, how to incorporate follow-through and overlapping action to create more realistic movements, and much more. Not only will you come away from the class with a custom animated logo, but you'll have a deeper understanding of how to utilize the principles of animation to communicate ideas and emotions through movement in any motion design project. To watch the class and all of my other classes and thousands of classes from super talented and successful creatives, use my link to get a 30-day free trial of Skillshare. I'm going to start with the L and toggle open to find the path property. I'm going to move to 25 frames and set a path keyframe, and then I'm going to move to where the L starts moving to the right. Right now the entire path and all of the points are selected, so I can't pick up and move individual points. So what I'm going to do is click off and then click back on right where it says L. Now you can see that the path is visible, but none of the points on the path are selected. So I'm going to zoom in and then just click and drag over all of these points on the left to select them. And I'm going to drag them out to the left. Then I'm going to move back to 10 frames. Then I'm going to copy and paste this keyframe so the L is back to its normal shape. And then at the start of the timeline, the L is scaled all the way to 0, so I can't see anything. So I'm going to open up the scale property and just take these keyframes and move them over and then set the scale to 100. So now I can actually see what I'm working with. And I'm going to select where it says L again, select these top points on the L path, and then drag them up to make the L tall. Let's add easy ease to these keyframes, and then go into the graph editor and make this graph just a little bit more interesting. So maybe something like that. And then I need to delete this scale keyframe and move these ones back into place. So here's what this looks like. In order for smears to look good, it's important that the thing that's creating the smear doesn't look like it's backtracking because of the smear. So let me explain more what I mean. So if we kind of scrub through this and just focus on the L, right here, the L isn't moving forward fast enough for it to look like it's a smear coming out from behind the L. That thick part of the L is kind of scaling from both sides, left and right. So to fix this, we need to find the fastest part of the position animation. So if I go into the graph editor and I'm looking at the speed graph, that's going to be this peak right here. And that's where I want the smear to be at its widest part. So the widest part is going to be this keyframe. So if I just drag this keyframe over, that's going to help. And then if I also go into the graph editor and adjust this graph so that it's fastest right as it's getting smeared. So like this. Now let's play that back. That looks a lot better. So right here, it's only moving forward and the smear is coming out from behind the L. It doesn't look like it's scaling. It looks more like a smear. Now let's move on to the O. So for the O, if you go into the path property, there's actually two different path properties because there's an inner path and an outer path. So I'm going to move my playhead to 25 frames and set a path keyframe for both of these. Then I'm going to go back to 15 frames and let's zoom in on the O. Right now, if I were just to animate this point right here, the O is not going to stretch in a way that I think looks good. So I'm going to undo that and go up to the pen tool and then click and hold and find the add vertex tool. I'm going to go really close to these existing points and add another point. So it probably helps to zoom in even more. So I'm adding a point right next to the existing point on both sides. And I'm also going to need to do this on the center circle. And then I can carefully select just the top points and then drag them up to create this smear. Then at the start of the timeline, I'm going to copy and paste these keyframes so that the O will start as a normal shape. So here's what that looks like. Let's make the smear look more like this and also make sure that it's not backtracking so that the smear is happening during the fastest part of the O's motion. So I'm going to open up the position property and let's just look at where the fastest part of the motion is. So it's happening right here, which might make the smear kind of hard because it's also scaling in then. So let's actually just adjust this position property. So maybe if the fastest part of the motion is right around here, I'm going to move these two keyframes over so that when the O is the most smeared, it lines up with the fastest part of the position of the O. And then I want the inner circle to be a little bit smaller so it makes the top thicker to give it more of a smeared look. So I'm going to go into the inner circle and let's zoom in. And then just grab all of these points and bring them down. And let's add easy ease to these keyframes. You could go into the graph editor and adjust these keyframes even more, but let's keep going. Hopefully it's relatively easy to figure out how to animate the G and the O based on how I animated the path property of the L and the first O. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip ahead, but here's what I have so far. One thing that I want to adjust is that you can see the letters when they're teeny tiny like this, and I want to avoid that. So I'm going to go to 3 frames and just trim the start of the letters so they start right at 3 frames. That way the letters will pop in and you won't have to see when they're really small. The next thing I want to do is stagger the layers so that the letters don't all come in at the same time. So let's have the L come in first. And I'm not staggering these evenly because I want the animation to follow the principle of ease in and ease out, which you can apply to keyframes, but you can also apply to a logo animation as a whole. So how this works is that the L is going to start the animation and there's relatively few things happening. And then there's going to be more things happening in the middle of the animation. And then this last O is going to finish off the animation more staggered than the rest so that it finishes with less things happening. So it's kind of tapering the amount of animation. So it starts off with a little bit less animation, less speed. In the middle, there's more animation, more things going on, things are moving faster. And then at the end, there's less animation and things are slowing down. Again, this is another thing that I talk more about in class. So here's what I have so far. To animate this logo out, I'm going to have each letter scaling. But right now, each of the anchor points are in different positions, and I want all of the letters to scale from the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to where I want them to start scaling out, and let's just go into the L. And if you go under Contents and then the L, there's another set of transform properties, which is just for this L shape. These transform properties here are for the entire layer, so you could have multiple shapes within this shape layer. But in these transform properties, if I toggle this open, there's another anchor point. Right now, it's right here. Usually these anchor points are already in the center, but because this was originally a text layer, the anchor point is here. So what I need to do is move this anchor point to the center. So I'm going to use the pan behind tool because unfortunately this tool doesn't work for this kind of anchor point, and also snapping doesn't work either. So I'm just going to carefully move that to the center. And let's just do that for all of the layers. Now to animate the letter scaling, I just want to find that scale property that's underneath Contents, and then the letter name, and then Transform, and the letter. And I'm going to animate this scale property. So I'll set a keyframe at 3 seconds for the scale to be 100, and then let's go to 310 and set this to 110, and then go to 4 seconds and set this to 0. So by animating the scale increasing a little bit before it scales down and completely disappears, I'm adding a principle of animation called anticipation. Let's add easing to these keyframes, and then go into the graph editor and just make this look a little bit more exciting. Now let's copy and paste this scale animation onto all of the other scale properties. So I'm going to search for scale to quickly bring up those properties, and then make sure that I'm pasting it under Transform and then the letter name. So now they're all going to scale out, but I also want to stagger the scale keyframes. So let's find that scale property again. And let's start with the L going first, and then scale these ones a couple frames after. So here's what I have. Let's also cut the ends of the layers so that they kind of pop out, and so you don't see these little tiny layers. So I'm just going to hit U to bring up all of the keyframes. And let's cut the layer when the size of the letter is about like this. Now that this animation is finished, the last thing to do is to bring it into another comp to add those accents. So I'm going to go into the project panel, take this comp that I've been working in, and drag it onto the new comp button to create a new composition with this inside. Let's create a shape for the background, so I'm just going to double click on the rectangle tool and move this to the bottom. Next, I'm going to duplicate this logo animation by hitting Command D. Then on the bottom copy of this comp, I'm going to add some effects. So I'm going to go to Effects and Presets and search for the Fill effect. Drag that on, and then I'll also find the Echo effect. And then I'll add this Echo effect to the comp. The Echo effect creates additional copies to create like a trail or a smear. Let's increase the number of copies. You can see what the Echo effect is doing, but I don't like the look of the gaps in between the letters. I want this to be a solid smear. So I'm going to set that echo time to something really low. And then let's also change the fill color. Even though I changed the fill color to this teal greenish, the echo is still showing in white, so I need to change the echo operator to maximum. I don't want the top copy of the logo to be black, so I'm going to copy this fill effect and paste it onto the top comp. and then just change this color to white. If I play this back right now, you can see that the smear for the green part is actually coming in before the smear on the white, which doesn't look quite right. I want it to be the other way around. So if I go to the second comp, right now the echo time is set to a positive number, which means that it's echoing before the thing that it's echoing. So I need to set this to a negative number, so I'll just add a negative sign in front of this. And now that green smear is going to be after the white. Let's duplicate the second comp to create another set of accents. On this third bottom version of the comp, I'm going to delete the echo effect, and then I'm going to change the fill color to the same color as the background. And then let's just offset this by a couple of frames. You're not going to be able to see this because it's the same color as the background. But what I'm going to do is add a stroke to this. So to do that, I'm going to right click, go to Layer Styles, and then Stroke. Toggle open the stroke, and let's set this to the green color. And let's make it on the inside. That way it won't be sticking out behind the letter. And here's the final animation. One last quick thing, if anyone's paying really close attention to detail, in this tutorial I moved the anchor point for each individual letter to the center of the letter so that when they animate out, they animate towards the center of the letter. But in my original logo animation, I did it slightly differently, so the letters go more towards the center of the composition. So if you want to do it that way, all you need to do is just go into each individual letter and move this anchor point towards the center of the comp instead of the center of the letter. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more, the link to my class is below. Bring a logo to life, Principles of Animation for Motion Designers, and I'll put the trailer here.